Welcome to Marketing and Mindset for Wellness Coaches, the podcast for health coaches and wellness entrepreneurs just like you who are building a business, making the world a healthier place, and designing a first-class life. I'm your host, Kim Foster, MD and certified business coach, and I'm on a mission to help you up-level your strategy and raise your mindset so you can truly thrive and grow your business. Let's get started. Well, hello, my friend. Welcome to today's episode. Now, let me ask you, do you identify as an introvert? This is a really interesting issue for me personally, and also for many of the women in my community, because it seems to me that many of us are on the introverted side of the spectrum when it comes to those of us in wellness and coaching in particular. And I said us because, yes, I definitely identify as an introvert myself. In fact, in many ways, I am really a classic introvert. I love being by myself, love it. I crave it, in fact, if I don't get enough of it. I really love the quiet. I love the solitude. It's where I come up with my best ideas. It's where I'm the most creative, and generally it's where I'm the most happy. I definitely recharge when I'm alone, which is a classic introvert quality. And I've really always been this way. I was always the kid who was reading a book on the playground. I was always the kid who wandered around by myself, daydreaming and being perfectly content, just making things up in my mind all by myself. I never really remember feeling lonely or bored. Those emotions are actually fairly unfamiliar to me. And you've heard me talk about my creative artsy childhood and adolescence, writing and doing all the visual arts and musical things. Now, in contrast, my husband is a classic extrovert. He is very charming and outgoing, and he loves being around people. He is completely comfortable in pretty much any room. He can walk into any situation and start striking up a conversation with people. He is always the guy who's speaking up in meetings and happily gives presentations and teaches classes and all those kinds of things. Honestly, I love all those qualities. And, they say that we're drawn to the qualities that we see missing in ourselves. And I'm pretty sure those were the qualities that I found the most magnetic in him, because they were almost like exotic personality traits to me. Now, throughout my life, I have found a lot of ways to embrace my hidden extroverted qualities. For example, in performing. So I've always loved to perform when I was a kid, and I have definitely put myself in a variety of settings where I had to channel my inner extrovert. I don't know if that makes any sense. Inner extrovert? I don't know. But anyway, so things like running for high school president, which is something that I did, and I actually won that election. But it required me to make a campaign speech in front of the entire school. And then, of course, running the student council meetings every week throughout my final year in high school. And med school certainly required me to interact with tons of people, lots of large-scale classes and presentations and groups. And now, as a coach and an entrepreneur, public speaking is something that I've been doing more and more of. So it's not that I can't do it, but I always come back to my preferred way to recharge, which is to be alone. Now, people talk a lot about introversion these days, a lot more than before, that's for sure. Ever since the book Quiet. If you haven't read this book, Quiet, by Susan Cain, you really should. It's so awesome. Or at least watch her TED Talk. It's just brilliant. And I think that this is a great thing, that there is a lot more conversation about introversion recently. It's kind of like out of the closet. And as an introvert, I love that there is a more positive movement towards introverts these days. However, I still think that there are some misconceptions, and I think that introversion gets tossed around a little too readily to explain away some behaviors and tendencies that aren't really, in my book, introversion. For example, some people say that they're introverted, but what they really are is a person with social anxiety. Now, these are different things. Introverts don't avoid social settings out of fear or anxiety. They just prefer to be solitary. They draw energy from their alone time, but it's not avoidance out of fear. That is a different thing. Now, it's possible to be both. But if you have social anxiety, which is an anxiety disorder around being in front of people or in social settings or being scrutinized in some way, then know that this is something that you can actually get help for. It doesn't have to be this way. It can be a very uncomfortable way to go about your days. I used to have major social anxiety. I had a big time fear of scrutiny and speaking in public and certain social settings, not all of them, but just certain ones. And I worked really hard to overcome a lot of those fears. And I largely did quite a while ago, but I'm still an introvert at heart. I still enjoy being alone. I recharge in the quiet. I do all my creative work and productive stuff in solitude. It's not a fear of being in a room with a bunch of people that makes me think twice about doing it. It's just that it's not the most productive or aligned way for me. So group meetings and group brainstorm sessions, these are usually, kind of a waste of time for me if I'm being totally honest. I don't really come up with great ideas in those kinds of settings. I come up with all my good stuff when I'm in my own little bubble. I also, being totally honest here, don't really contribute a lot of stuff in group meetings. And this used to confuse me. I never used to really understand why I didn't speak up or ask questions. Even if I didn't really feel anxious or worried about it, I just wouldn't really. Until I came to understand that it was just an expression of my introversion. I just found that I was too busy listening and absorbing and digesting what was being said instead of trying to be heard. I've never been the one to throw up my hand and state my thoughts or be the first one to ask a question. For me, it's always been about listening. That's kind of my default thing. It's not really so much about being heard. And that's one of the core truths of introversion for me. But that said, I definitely enjoy social settings. I enjoy connecting with people and mingling and speaking in public and performing. Like I said, you've maybe heard in my previous episodes when I talked about my early teenage years of being on stage and all about the performing arts. So this is in limited bursts. I should qualify that. I legitimately do enjoy those activities and I have fun and I get really fired up in a room of like-minded people. I do love that. So much so that I've actually wondered from time to time if I'm actually an extrovert who was kind of pushed into a shell by some social anxiety when I was younger. And I think I may actually be just a little closer to the middle of maybe the middle of the introvert-extrovert spectrum than I kind of always assumed that I was, but definitely with a preference towards introversion. Because of course, as I said, when I really think about it, I feel most nourished when I'm totally alone and in a quiet house all by myself. Now, this, of course, has created a big challenge for me as a mother of two boys. Oh my God, two very crazy, very loud boys who are active and energetic. And did I mention loud? So my alone time was distinctly cut back when I became a mom, and I have had to work very hard to carve out some wedges of quiet alone time. But anyway, back to the subject. So introversion is not the same thing as social anxiety. It's not the same thing as shyness, and it's definitely not the same thing as having a lack of confidence. A lot of times people will label themselves as an introvert when what they really have is a lack of confidence. And again, confidence is something that can be worked on. It's something that you can actually build. So it would be a shame to just chalk things up to being an introvert when it's really a confidence issue. Now, all that said, if you do know that you are an introvert or have introverted tendencies, let's talk about that. Specifically, let's talk about how to be an introverted entrepreneur and how to market yourself when you're an introvert, because this is not always easy. Much of the world is oriented toward extroverts. Social media, for example, seems to have been created for extroverts. And group things and meetings and networking and publicity, it all seems to be so extrovert biased, doesn't it? So it can be a challenge if you're an introvert to really figure out how to market and promote yourself in a way that feels good, that feels aligned, and that doesn't completely drain all of your energy. So I've got 6 tips for you today. Now, before I get there, though, I just want to clear up a little bit of terminology. I believe, as do many people, that the introverted-extroverted thing isn't a black and white situation. It's not binary. Like it isn't an either or. Like you're purely one way way or purely the other, as I kind of started to allude to a little bit earlier. For me, it's a spectrum. Everybody has a bit of a blend. It's really the rare person who is completely one way or the other in all situations across the board. So in this episode, when I talk about introverts, I'm talking about people who are predominantly introverted or who lean closer to the introverted side of the spectrum. Same thing when I say extroverts. It's really more of a tendency. It's not black and white. Okay, so that said, let's move forward. Here are the 6 strategies that I have. Number 1 is to embrace your power as an introvert. That's right. I actually believe that introversion can be a superpower if you allow it to be. It can often feel like the world is oriented to favor extroverts, and that's because extroverts are the most visible. Let's face it, the public sees extroverts more commonly, and the extroverts are the ones who are calling those meetings and the conferences, and they're interacting with people because that is how they're hardwired. They're out there voicing their opinions, generally being seen and heard because that's how they prefer to work. But that definitely doesn't mean that there isn't a place for introverts in the world, and specifically as entrepreneurs. In fact, the world needs introverts, in my opinion. And here are a few superpowers that you can claim as an introvert. One is listening skills, excellent listening skills. Introverts are wonderful listeners. This, in fact, is something that introverts really do tend to love to do, much more so than extroverts. And this quality really lends itself to the profession of coaching, for example, which is so much about listening. 2 is being well prepared. Introverts love to be well prepared in their work and gain a lot of satisfaction and comfort from being prepared and organized in general. A 3rd superpower of introverts is observing emotions. So that natural sensitivity to others' emotions, it often goes with the territory of being an introvert. They're often really good at reading unseen and unspoken messages in a situation and tapping into their natural empathy. 4 is naturally creative. Now, having a rich inner world means that introverts are naturally more creative and imaginative. 5 is what I call a strong North Star. So this is a strong sense of your own inner motivation, your own values. It's often a hallmark of introversion to have a strong sense of this. And introverts may be naturally less oriented to pleasing others than extroverts are. 6 is depth of skills and mastery. So the focus and quiet time required to go deep on mastering a particular skill or solving a problem, that's just something that will come easier for an introvert compared to an extrovert. Okay, so that is strategy number 1, is to embrace all of your superpowers, that whole list, and that's just 6 of them. There are actually plenty more, but those are some key ones. So embracing your superpowers as an introvert. So let's move on to strategy number 2 for marketing yourself as an introvert, which is schedule your social media. Now, I really couldn't figure out social media until I began to embrace scheduling. I know that some people are just naturally inclined to post things spontaneously and share their experiences in the moment and all of those kinds of things, but I am just not that way. It doesn't really occur to me in the moment to share the stuff that I'm doing. I'm just doing it. Now, maybe this is just a habit and not really a tendency like being an introvert, but I kind of think it actually is an expression of introversion. I'm just not oriented towards showing and sharing and being seen and heard, like I said. And it's not because I'm afraid of it, but it's just because it doesn't really occur to me in the moment. I don't think of it until much later, of course. So knowing that social media is important, though, in terms of building a business and building visibility, I have figured out how to be more visible online without having to retrain myself to think about sharing stuff throughout the day. And that is just to simply schedule it. Of course, this is also a time saver and a productivity tool, but in this context, it's a way of getting out there without having to try to change my natural inclination. So I batch my social media posts, I schedule them with the help of my amazing social media manager, naturally. And I know that I will talk much more about the concept of outsourcing and hiring help in future episodes of this podcast. But for now, this totally works for me. I get myself into kind of a sharing frame of mind and then batch produce all my posts for the week ahead. It's really great. So if you're an introvert, I definitely recommend this. In fact, I kind of recommend this strategy for all entrepreneurs, not just introverts, because like I say, it's a huge time saver, but especially for introverts who are having trouble kind of putting themselves out there and just being visible. Okay, so strategy number 3 for introverts is to get professional photo shoots. This is a great way to get more visible as an introvert without having to be all spontaneous and outgoing about it, because a professional photo shoot happens behind the scenes on your schedule, and it's just you and the photographer. It only creates the impression of being highly visible and confident and whatever else you want to convey with your photographs. A good photographer will work with you to help you become more comfortable in front of the camera, but really anybody can take a good photo with a bit of coaching and practice and just relaxing into it. People do want to see you, whether this is something that you love or not. And if it's not your thing, to take a bunch of spontaneous selfies, having a stockpile of gorgeous professional images that you can use and repurpose for months or more is the perfect way to get this done. So strategy number 4 is to prioritize one-on-one meetings and authentic connection. Now, this in my mind is what actually makes introverts the perfect coaches, because introverts prefer to have one-to-one interactions or meetings or very small groups at the biggest. That intimate, authentic connection with another person is far preferable to big groups or meetings for an introvert. So set up your business and your workday this way. In terms of networking, introverts often thrive one-on-one. Again, so not just the coaching, but in terms of making connections, it's interacting with kindred spirits. This is a wonderful way to build your connections without draining your emotional reserve. So focus on that brand of networking and connecting with people, just those one-to-one, more intimate meetings and really authentic connections. Okay, let's move on to strategy number 5, which is to manage your energy in networking events. So as I started to talk just a little bit about networking in that last tip, because even though you may be prioritizing one-on-one situations, there are definitely some benefits to larger groups and conferences at certain times. Now, when it's time to allow yourself the experience of a larger community, I don't want you to pressure yourself to mingle with everybody and stay up the latest and dance all night. You really do get to show up in the way that works for you. And when you've had enough, you get to practice good self-care by returning to your room to recharge or meditate or have a hot bath or whatever. Now, I usually go to 1 or 2 big coaching events each year, and I absolutely love them. I turn on my extroverted juices as much as possible and just dive in. But I am very careful to manage my energy, and I know that I need to have my own room. Never do I get a roommate in these kinds of situations, even though, yes, it would save money, but it's not worth it for me because I really need to have my own space. And when I am feeling like I've had enough of the mingling and the networking, I simply go back to my room and enjoy a little quiet time all alone. And, then I'm ready to go back out there and have fun without it totally draining me. And I usually get room service breakfast and chill out by myself in the quiet in the morning before jumping into everything. And that balance, it works perfectly for me. So I would encourage you to consider the same kind of thing. But whatever works for you, it's really a matter of being aware of what your needs are and managing your energy in those kinds of situations. So my final strategy for introverts in terms of how to market yourself, strategy number 6, is to embrace your natural affinity for sales. Now, I know this one may be tough to believe, and that's because most people assume that extroverts are naturally, quote unquote, better at sales. But this is not always the case. In fact, some of the most successful and influential salesmen have been prototypical introverts. If you did read the book Quiet by Susan Cain, which I'm going to link that in the show notes for this podcast, but if you did read that book, you'll have read about these cases of some really famous and very influential salesmen. Because here's the thing, being good at sales is not really about being charming and entertaining and outgoing. Your most powerful skill in making sales is listening. Listening is the key to being good at sales. Really hearing what your potential client is struggling with, what her frustrations are, what her problems are, and then talking to her in a genuine, authentic way about how you can help with those specific pain points. And as I've said, listening and that one-to-one connection are part of an introvert's superpowers. So you have definitely got this. The big challenge is going to be dealing with your own inner limiting beliefs that you are not good at sales sales because you assume that you're not extroverted enough. But for more help with this, I encourage you to go back and listen to my podcast episode number 7, which is called The Art of Sales, when I talk all about the mindset shifts that you need to make in order to step into that identity as somebody who is actually good at sales. Okay, so there you have it. Those are my 6 strategies for marketing when you're an introvert. And I'm hoping that you've enjoyed listening to this topic. And I just want to thank you so much for being a listener of this podcast. As you know, this is a pretty new venture for me, and I just love the privilege of being in your ears every week. It is so fun for me, and I so appreciate you. So until next time, have an amazing week. Bye for now. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode and you're keen to keep building your wellness coaching business, let's start by getting you some more clients. You can download my free guide called 3 Ways to Win New Clients This Week. In this 11-page workbook, I walk you through the simple steps to get you new coaching clients. Just 3 easy things that you can do right away. Visit drkimfoster.com/get new clients to download that workbook for free. That's all for today. I will talk to you in the next episode.